bring in former Assistant Secretary of Defense Lawrence Korb right now. Lawrence, the Egyptian Prime Minister is saying nothing can be ruled out. What is your initial take on this situation? Accident or act of terrorism?
Well, it's hard to explain. We got a pilot that has 6,000 hours. If he did have some sort of mechanical problem or something, that he wouldn't have radioed anything. You also had the report that people saw sort of an explosion, you know, in the sky. So given, you know, what happened in the Sinai, you may remember a couple of months ago where, you know, the plane blew up. Given the fact that ISIS does not seem to be doing well on the ground, they've resorted to terrorist attacks in Baghdad. This may be another way for them to show that they're still relevant, and while you may, you know, beat them in Iraq or Syria for a while, that there are other places that they can do things.
Well, the other thing is that it happened so quickly, right? I mean, witnesses are saying that they saw some spark in the air, but we don't know what that means. And if it were terrorism, it could have happened very quickly, Lawrence.
Well, very, very, very definitely. And again, you know, if you're flying along and you're a, you know, pilot with a, you know, 6,000 hours, you see something, you're going to radio something, you know, it's very rare unless something, you know, untoward happens that, you know, it would go this way.
Yeah. Well, Jackie McDowell, you mentioned earlier that Egypt Air has had a history of issues, history of hijackings, in fact, most recently back in March.
Right. I would speak to, and I'll ask Lawrence this question, but because the jetliner took off from Charles de Gaulle in Paris and not from another city where the security procedures might be lacking somewhat, could we be reassured at least a little bit the fact that this plane took off, whether it's a hijacking or not, whatever the cause may be, reassured by a little bit at least because this plane departed from Paris?
Well, you certainly would be more assured, but don't forget when we had a co-pilot on the German aircraft, you know, that caused problems here several months ago, and as you pointed out here earlier, when you had the co-pilot on the plane, you know, flying Egypt Air flying from you know, this part of the world back over there, so it could be one of the crew that would be involved.
Well, that's a good point, because we are tracking reports that dozens of airport workers in Paris were on the terror watch list. Lawrence.
That's right. And again, while certainly, you know, you would hope that the procedures in Paris would be better than, you know, some third world country, the fact of the matter is, if it's one of the workers,
right,
and it's one of the, you know, the citizens of the country who happen to be radicalized for one reason or another, this could be something that you can't completely control.
John Hilsenrath.
Lawrence, we were talking earlier about the possibility that this was a mistake, that some military unit accidentally shot this plane out of the sky. Who is active? I mean, this is a war zone. Who is active in that part of the Mediterranean? And is that the kind of scenario that you could see, that you would put on the list of possibilities?
Well, obviously, you don't want to exclude anything, and yes, everybody is, because you have the airstrikes of the 60 nations that the United States is leading, you know, in Syria. Now we're also involved in Libya. That obviously is a possibility, but again, the ISIS doesn't have any planes, and the only, you know, people who have planes are people we're working with. You may remember that the Russian airliner went into Turkish airspace, but this is over the Mediterranean.
But who's active there? You've got Egyptians, you've got Israelis, presumably you've got Americans. Who are the active military forces in that part of the Mediterranean? Well, the Greeks.
Well, you've got the Greeks, you have the Italians, obviously, who are very much concerned about what's happening in Libya. So it could be any of those, but again, that is very unlikely given the fact that ISIS doesn't have any planes and you're not worried about them. And this plane was not going into their airspace, it was going out of it, going back toward Egypt.
Right. You know, Donald Trump has tweeted out, looks like yet another terrorist attack. Airplane departed from Paris. When will we get tough, smart, and vigilant? Great hate and sickness. This tweet just coming, being posted in the last 20 minutes or so. But Lawrence, can you make that reach?
Well, I think, as you mentioned right in the beginning, the Egyptian Prime Minister is not ruling anything out. But given the fact that, you know, Mr. Trump is the presumptive nominee, you would hope he'd be a little bit more cautious and say something that don't want to exclude anything. Let's ensure it's not. But, you know, when you say it looks like, I mean, because everybody around the world's paying attention to him now.
Right, right. Okay, so we know that this flight lost contact with radar over the Mediterranean Sea after entering Egyptian airspace and disappeared from radar about 174 miles from the Egyptian coast. This search is underway, Lawrence. What are you looking at in terms of most important? What do you need to hear from the search and rescue team at this point?
Well, what you want to hear is, you know, basically, obviously, we want to make sure if there's any people still alive that we can get them. But basically, you know, what does it look like? Does it look like an explosion? Does it look like a mechanical failure? Did the plane break up on impact, or had it broken up even before it landed?
Look, we should point out that, you know, we're talking about Donald Trump's tweet. Egypt Air tweeted earlier that the military search and rescue received a distress call from the airplane emergency equipment. Now, I recognize that this is being debated about this distress call, but this is from Egypt Air.
And Egypt has had a problem with the transparency. What Garrett Tenney was talking about, what Lawrence was also talking about, because to this day, that 1999 plane crash, the plane that took the co-pilot crashed the plane. To this day, Egypt officials deny that it was the co-pilot responsible for it. They, to this day, say that it's a mechanical failure. So they have some issues with what they tell the public and what they'll admit.
Yeah. Lawrence, thank you. Thank you very much for weighing in. We appreciate it. Lawrence Korb there.